Hi BookTube, welcome to another fiction review. It is an expectation of growing up, is it not, that at some point, or to some degree, we leave home. Now, the act of leaving is not as simple as newly independent adults might believe. That is, the physical distance that you could put between yourself and your past may have little or no effect on the person that you become, because leaving and changing are two completely different things. Today, we're going to review Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay, which is the third book of the Neopolitan Quartet, written by Elena Ferrante and translated by Ann Goldstein. This was published in the year 2013, and it has 400 pages. Now, I read this as a library ebook, but I have seen paperback prices online, which I show you lots of reasonable copies to get hold of if you have decided that you would like to go through this Neopolitan Quartet. And I would encourage it. I agree, because you must be thinking now, wait a minute, Heather, you read book 1 back in March, you read book 2 in June, it's December now. and yeah, I did experience that fatigue that is unique to me when it comes to reading series, that I just think, no, I want to read other things. No, I still want to read other things. However, I think it says something for the quartet that I didn't have any trouble picking up finally and getting back into book 3. And in fact, book 3, I actually read faster than books 1 or 2. And I'm struggling now that I've come to book 3 to think, what do I call this series? The first 2 books I think I referred to as Bildungsroman. And I thought, yeah, that's true. But the characters are adults now. In fact, their own children are having Bildungsroman if there had been stories written about them. So I'm really not sure what to call it. Autobiography? No, because the book isn't about one character. It's always about 2, as any of you who've read these will know. And I don't think saga, I've put it in there with another question mark, saga, that's not the right label in all respects, because the lives of these 2 protagonists, Elena and Raffaella, they each seem to affect the other as if they were sort of bound together in some mystical fashion. And so it's not like period realism sagas where everything's quite mundane and ordinary. There just seems to be something slightly above the ordinary going on here. And for this review, it seems pointless, really, to repeat the fact that we don't know who Elena Ferrante is. It is a pseudonym. The real author is unknown. So I thought, hey, translators do not get the credit they deserve for their work. So let's focus instead on Ann Goldstein, who was born in 1949 in New Jersey. She went to Bennington College, Vermont. Now, Bennington College has produced some incredible literary names. Donna Tartt, Bret Easton Ellis, Kieran Desai, Susan Sontag. So it seems like, wow, what was Ann Goldstein then destined for? Well, she did begin after graduation working for the New Yorker magazine, so good start. And it was while she was there that she began taking Italian lessons. And so that led into all this translation work. So she's translated Primo Levi and Rita Charbonnier and Donatello di Pietrantonio. And Goldstein has admitted that with regard to Elena Ferrante, since the publication of the last of the Neopolitan Quartet books, she's been increasingly called upon to stand in at publicity events for this unknown novelist who goes by the pen name. And that seems like a better or worse fate. So in a sense, she has had to step in and act like a best-selling author, even though she's actually the translator of the work. And her latest work is to translate a novel by Alba de Cespedes called There's No Turning Back. Right, now we talk about book 3. The narration, as usual, it's first person. Our first person narrator is Elena. Now, if you've read books 1 and 2, you know by now that Elena, she's inclined to become inactive when she's stressed or unhappy. She goes all passive. And that's in contrast to Raffaella, who gets very aggressive and takes initiative. Now, personally, I hope that Elena would kind of get beyond this ineffective coping strategy, and especially as at the end of book 2, she was a published author and doing very well, selling very well. And yet, Elena, she's never confident that that success says anything about her, proves anything about her. She still feels as though she is the little girl who grew up in a poor neighborhood in Naples. So she questions and she cross-questions her decisions. She struggles to build on the writing career that she started. And I might have found that aspect really irritating, except that the external events happening in the book and the tensions between characters, they were what really were pulling me along. And so at worst, I think I had maybe a moment or two of mild irritation whenever Elena would go into one of these soul-searching episodes on the page, and yet never seemed to get to any helpful insight. And in book 3, the setting starts to move back and forth a little bit more. So Elena Greco is wealthy now, so she travels a lot more. She marries a classics professor at the university in Florence, and she raises her family there. It's a genteel, gentle existence, and it contrasts really harshly with those occasional visits that she makes back to Naples, to her old neighborhood, and particularly when she sees how Raffaella is doing. These visits are always decided, by the way, by the needs of her family and friends. She never really chooses to go back to Naples, but she feels the pull of those family obligations. Now, in Naples, Elena is much closer to the working class reality on the ground and the political tensions which are obligating many of her friends to choose which side are they going to support, far left or far right. The setting and time is a little different. It starts with a short episode set in 2005 where Elena talks about a conversation that she had with Raffaella before the disappearance that we know about from back at the beginning of book 1. Then we move back to, I would say, around 1967. It's hard to be sure where that part of the book actually begins. What we do know is that about page 100, Elena announces to you that she gets married in May of 1969. So then you have a moment that you could pinpoint there. And then the next date, not the next date, sorry, I should say the last date that is given in the text is March 1976. That's very close to the end of the book. And I would say, although it isn't specified, that the events of the novel finish while we're still in 1976. Number of characters, well, as usual, in the Neopolitan Quartet, there is a host of characters, and they just keep growing. And so please refer, if you do read the books, there is always a set of pages, I believe, I can't remember if they were in the back or the front of the book. Isn't that terrible? It's because I had an ebook. You get lost in space in a way that you don't do with a physical book. But there is always a list of characters and a narrative about each of them so that you can get a bit caught up if it's been a while since, like me, since you read books 1 or 2. And also you get a sense of how they're related to each other, because that gets very tangled. Got to talk about mobility, because the title of this book, Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay, suggests that mobility is going to be a prominent theme, and it is. If a book group were meeting and they were going to talk about this book, I think they could discuss, what does it mean to leave and to stay? I think those terms need to be defined for different characters, because there are characters who continue to live in Naples, pretty much around the area they were born and where their parents were born and where their grandparents were born, and yet they seem sometimes more dynamic, more forward-looking than other characters who may have traveled away and they seem very sophisticated, and yet they are repeating old habits, old thinking habits, old behavior habits. And another good book group question would be like an open discussion which talks about the decisions that the different characters make to either stay or leave, and talk about which will turn out to be good ones and which will turn out to be bad in the end. The Neopolitan Quartet has problematic content. In book 3, I would say there are 2 sources of problematic content principally. Okay, one is the political situation in Italy in the late 60s and early 70s. Historians call it the years of lead. And it was the period from 1968 to 1988, during which militant neo-fascist and far-left organizations clashed. They were both trying to use strategies to gain more power and influence over the government by different terrorist activities. So there were bombings, there were assassinations, massacres, targeted kidnappings. And this tension frames the novel. It seems to frame the lives of most of the characters. That is, you could view each of them in terms of how and in what way they are involved and or affected by this political extremism going on around them. There isn't a great deal of violence depicted in the novel, but when you do get some, you get some. And it's enough to kind of frighten you, because you realize that these groups, they don't have the boundaries, the civil boundaries that you might. They're willing to do just about anything to be heard and to have power over the group that they oppose. And the second source of problematic content will be infidelity. You will be used to that from book 2, although I would say that book 3 does not have the same amount of sexual content as book 2. And I think that's because most of the players now, the characters who were all the school friends of Raffaella and Elena, they all get married, they have children. Life just kind of settles a little bit. So any sexual content there is in book 3 is really more transgressive. It's workplace harassment, it's adultery, it's rape. The longest description of sexuality doesn't last more than a couple of paragraphs, so it isn't really onerous. The rape, by the way, is just a mention. There is no retelling. If you did watch my video about book 2, you might remember that I put up on screen a chart that was taken from ideas of Kurt Vonnegut about how you can use a graph to chart the good and bad circumstances and how those change for any particular character throughout the story time. And so the chart for book 2, I'm going to put it back up on screen now, looks like this. Okay, I'm not going to review this in detail. The important thing to notice is that near the end of book 2, I would say that Elena's fortunes rise while Raffaella or Lila's fortunes plummet. And so the graph has a cross, effectively, near the end. Now, in book 3, if I were making the graph again, I would say their fortunes cross another time, this time with Raffaella, who becomes wealthier and more stable. Elena, although she seems to be stable because she's married and having kids and doing all those domestic things, there is something inherently unstable about her yet. And so toward the end of the book, that has consequences. And so that in that sense, they cross. Now, to be clear, at the end of book 2, Lila was absolutely destitute. She was working for low wages in a sausage factory. That's not what we're talking about with Elena. It's not really so much an economic fall from grace, because she's feeling very excited and thrilled about this change, but they're her words, not mine. I would say the ground is not solid under her feet, both literally and metaphorically. And I'm going to read now from the last page of the novel, just to show you what I mean. And the plane began its takeoff. How exciting it was to lift off from the ground with a jerk and see the houses that became parallelepipeds, and the street that changed into strips, and the countryside that was reduced to a green patch, and the sea that inclined like a compact paving stone, and the clouds that fell below in a landslide of soft rocks. And the anguish, the pain, the very happiness that became part of a unique, luminous motion. It seemed to me that flying subjected everything to a process of simplification. And I sighed. I tried to lose myself. At times, I had the impression that the floor under my feet, the only surface I could count on, was trembling. And this was an aspect of the novel that bothered me for a little while. And that was because Elena repeats a mistake that Raffaella has already made. And that's even though she knows how much her friend sacrificed, how much she suffered, and she knows more than that. So I thought those facts would be enough to make her immune. And it got me thinking about this business of the graphs, Kurt Vonnegut's little charts of how circumstances go in stories, of fortunes going back and forth as if someone is pulling. And I had the feeling that the novel actually hinted at this, hinted at the idea of forces being underneath characters' actions, pulling, or they were giving into being pulled. And so the power of an ebook is that you can go in and search whether your suspicion is backed up by the text. So I searched for all occurrences of words like pull, force, influence, power. And then I just read all the passages that came up with those results. And when I reread them, it reminded me of how much this book really does feel like it's about power struggles. There's the political power struggles going on in Italy amongst other people. And yet between the characters themselves, and even within singular characters like Elena, there is a power struggle going on for which part of them or which persona do they want to become, or do they want to retain, so to speak. And at one point, Elena actually says about Raffaella that her friend had, quote, desired to pull me into her suffering so that I too would feel it. And later, she suspects that Raffaella might actually have some, quote, mysterious secret power. And she imagines herself yelling at Raffaella and saying, "What have you done to me?" And I've heard criticism of the Neopolitan Quartet, which goes something along these lines, that the story seems just ever so slightly unrealistic, like it just sits slightly above what could be accepted as real. Not impossible, but just slightly above. And my feeling is that the construction of this series, now that I've seen it in 3 books, is that there's a thematic construction, which sometimes means that characters act in order to support the construction and not truly acting from their own motivations. Lila and Raffaella, the fact that they change fortunes back and forth, and I think we can see that in books 1 as well. If I could graph book 1 and book 2 and book 3, we'd see them always crossing, exchanging good fortune for bad, each of them sort of taking turns, as if that's what this was about. And I see that. It's as if their lives are slightly choreographed. So although they do behave in character, I do think to some degree too, this is also a bit of a dance in which each of them comes forward, moves back as the author decides. Now, do I think that's a point to criticize? No, I think it's going to appeal more to some readers and less to others. I think some people will go into this and start to feel at first that it is a totally realistic novel. And then I think as they move through the series, they'll go, no, there's something that doesn't feel, it's just slightly, you know, the way a note is just off key, ever so slightly. It takes a very sensitive ear to pick it up. And I had to remind myself that in fact, I have very much enjoyed other books where the thematic construction and the way the characters act is far more obvious than it is in the Neopolitan Quartet. And that's the review done, everybody. And there's not much in the description box. There's just a link to an interview with the translator, Ann Goldstein, because this is sort of championing her, since she's someone that we can see. I thought if she has to do the work of the author, she may as well enjoy some of the credit of the author, I think. And I don't have much else to say myself. I'm filming a lot today, so I'm going to go on now and do a tag video, which you'll see whenever things get too busy. That's when you'll see that, my usual strategy for tag videos. I hope you're doing all right with your December reading, filming, editing, etc., etc. And I'll see you again in a few days' time. Take care. Bye-bye.